As the movie begins, we see a group of gangsters coercing a young boy into participating in a gang initiation. This includes smoking drugs and handling a gun. In another grainy footage, the boy is seen riding on a motorcycle with his friend, clearly under the influence of drugs. Suddenly, they spot a woman walking with her child, and without any regard for human life, one of them heartlessly shoots and ends her life. In a desperate attempt to escape, they rush across a busy road, but unfortunately they are struck by an approaching vehicle and meet a tragic fate. We are first introduced to Harry Brown, a former Marine with a distinguished military background, who lives alone in a rundown housing estate. In his solitude, he faces the harsh realities of life as his daughter rests in peace at the cemetery and his wife Kathy remains trapped in a comatose state at the hospital. Each day, Harry follows a routine that starts with waking up, having breakfast, tending to his dishes, and donning his tie and jacket. He then sets out on a walk to the hospital for his daily visit. Following this, Harry meets up with his best friend Leonard, affectionately known as Len, at a local pub, where they play a game of chess over a few drinks. Harry lives in a neighborhood plagued by violent gangs, misguided youths, and drug lords who have turned the area into a hub of senseless violence and crime. Although he attempts to remain indifferent to the violence, he often avoids passing through a specific public underpass. The truth is, the drug-dealing gangsters have instilled fear in the residents, rendering certain parts of the neighborhood off-limits. These criminals sell illicit substances and weapons and randomly assault anyone who crosses their path, regardless of whether they pose a threat. Additionally, the underpass has become a notorious gathering spot for local gangs who intimidate and attack both young and elderly individuals alike. Preferring a quiet and peaceful existence, Harry begins one of his days by visiting his wife at the hospital, choosing to avoid the pedestrian underpass along the way. Later on, he proceeds to his local pub, where he meets Leonard and engages in a friendly game of chess. Later that night, Harry is awakened by a phone call from the hospital, delivering the distressing news of his wife's critical condition. Instantly shaken to his core, Harry hastily leaves his home, driven by an overwhelming sense of urgency. Along his path, he encounters the familiar underpass he always avoids, wary of the menacing criminals who frequently gather there. Harry then experiences a moment of indecision when confronted with the option of taking a quicker route through the cramped underpass. He ultimately decides against it, well aware of the dangers that lie within. Tragically, upon reaching the hospital, his heart sinks with despair as Harry receives the heartbreaking news of Kathy's demise. After burying his wife beside their deceased 13-year-old daughter, Harry finds solace in the company of his best friend, Len. As they spend time together with a game of chess and a drink, Harry fondly recalls his days in the Marines and the fateful encounter that brought Kim and Kathy together. Shortly after, Len unexpectedly asks Harry if he ever took another person's life during his military service. This question deeply upsets Harry, as he has long distanced himself from that violent life. In a moment of vulnerability, Len reveals to Harry that he's become the target of local gangsters, causing him to live in constant fear for his life. Fearing the lawless nature of the area's young population, Len shows Harry an old bayonet he now carries as a means of self-defense. Concerned, Harry advises Len against taking matters into his own hands and suggests reporting the situation to the police instead. However, Len admits that he's lost faith in the authorities as they always disregard his complaints, which sparks a surge of anger within him. Back in his apartment, Len abruptly awakens by the putrid stench of burning dog feces that someone had maliciously pushed through his mail slot. The following day, Harry receives an unexpected visit from Detective Inspector Alice Frampton and Detective Sergeant Terry Hickok, who deliver heartbreaking news of Len's tragic demise. Frampton then proceeds to disclose that Len was violently assaulted and discovered lifeless in the underpass. She further explained that the perpetrator has not yet been apprehended, as the investigation is still ongoing. Overwhelmed with grief, Harry breaks down in tears and mourns the loss of his beloved best friend who fell victim to the heartless criminals. In the aftermath, Noel Winters, the leader of the local gang, along with Carl, Dean, and Marky, is apprehended by the police. However, they all refuse to cooperate and remain silent regarding Len's murder. Noel, in particular, displays abusive behavior towards the officers, portraying his incarcerated father as a kingpin or a prominent figure in local criminal activities. Moreover, he boasts about the reign of terror he and his gang have imposed on the neighborhood, carrying on his father's criminal legacy. But despite these circumstances, the lack of evidence leads to their eventual release. Following Len's funeral, Harry, burdened with grief, heads to the local pub and drinks heavily. Meanwhile, one of the gang members named Dean keeps a watchful eye on Harry and follows him as he leaves the bar to return home. Upon finding Harry alone, Dean swings a knife, threatening him to hand over all of his money. Surprisingly, as Dean draws near, Harry utilizes his military training from his time as a Marine, swiftly turning the tables and using the knife to fatally stab Dean in the chest. Overwhelmed by panic, Harry rushes back to his apartment. The following day, Detective Frampton visits Harry to disclose that the murder weapon, which is an old military bayonet, had Len's fingerprints on it. She then informs Harry that due to Len being killed with his own bayonet, any charges could potentially be reduced to manslaughter under the claim of self-defense. Outraged by the injustice of the legal system, Harry makes a bold choice to take matters into his own hands. The next night, he tracks down a drug dealer named Kenny from Sid's pub and follows him to a shabby house. Inside, Harry successfully negotiates a deal for a pistol. However, he is confronted with an appalling sight: drug dealers cultivating large amounts of cannabis, making pornography, and mistreating a young girl on the verge of an overdose. Harry pleads with one of the men stretched to call for medical assistance, but instead he becomes hostile and threatens them. Forced into a dangerous situation, Harry stabs Kenny in the hand before fatally shooting him in the head. He then injures Stretch, who is trying to escape, before ultimately ending his life as well. After killing both of the drug lords, Harry steals multiple handguns, sets fire to the drug den, and drives the unconscious girl to the hospital in their vehicle. During this chaotic turn of events, Harry discovers a substantial amount of money in a bag that he'd picked up from the den. He then keeps a portion for himself while leaving a generous sum for the girl's recovery. Eventually, he donates the drug money to a local church, ensuring it serves a more meaningful purpose. Over the next few days, Harry keeps a close watch on the gang and the underpass from Len's old apartment. Meanwhile, a notorious heroin smuggler who supplies Noel and his gang locates them and demands payment. When the gang fails to meet the payment, the supplier threatens Noel and commands one of the younger gang members, Marky, to get into his vehicle before driving away. Following this, Harry discreetly follows their movements, only to discover the drug kingpin exploiting Marky sexually as a form of payment. In response, Harry intervenes by shooting the man through the car windshield and killing him before taking Marky hostage. Harry then takes Marky into an abandoned apartment and, through brutal whipping, coerces Marky into revealing the key details of Len's murder. To his dismay, Marky not only confesses to the crime, but also gives away damning evidence. Footage of Len's murder, along with the disturbing act of Noel urinating on the old man's body. This horrifying footage ultimately proves the gang's direct involvement and that they did not kill Len in self-defense. Afterwards, Harry uses Marky as a human shield to bait Noel and Carl into a gunfight at the underpass. After a brief standoff, Harry shoots Carl in the chest, who in turn accidentally kills Marky with a headshot. Shortly after, Harry emerges from the tunnel and executes a wounded Carl before pursuing Noel, who fled the scene. Unfortunately, before he can catch up to Noel, the poor old man collapses from an emphysema attack, leading him to be taken to the hospital. Back at the police station, Detective Frampton believes elderly prisoner Harry to be the perpetrator of the recent gang-related deaths. She reveals to her boss, Superintendent Childs, that she smelled a hint of gunfire residue on Harry's coat while visiting him at the hospital. To further support her claims, Frampton reveals that all of the gang members she interrogated about Len's murder case have turned up dead. On the other hand, Childs is convinced that the recent gang-related deaths are the cause of a gang war. He argues that a few more drug dealers who were neither a part of the local gang nor were interrogated have also been mysteriously shot dead. Furthermore, he absolutely refuses to believe that all of the recent violent crimes come down to a vigilante pensioner. At last, Childs informs Frampton that she has been reassigned to an identity theft unit and leaves. Following this, Superintendent Childs orders a massive raid on the apartment complex, certain that the gang-related deaths are the result of an escalating gang war, and not Harry being the vigilante as Frampton had suspected. However, this late-night raid causes a massive riot to break out in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, Harry awakens and discharges himself from the hospital in order to pursue and kill Noel. When Detective Frampton gets the news of this, she convinces Sergeant Hickok to help her stop him, so they attempt to follow Harry to the estate. Unfortunately, they end up being badly injured in a car crash in the ongoing riots. Luckily, Harry comes to the rescue and safely pulls the both of them from the wrecked car. He then takes the 2 injured police officers to the local pub. Now Harry convinces the pub's owner, Sid, to let them stay in to evade the riot outside. However, Frampton confronts Harry about his actions and reveals that Sid is Noel's uncle, leaving him stunned and distraught. Upon hearing this, Harry finds Sid in the pub basement where he's been hiding Noel from Harry and the police. He then shows the video of Len getting brutally beaten up. For a moment, Sid appears to be apologetic while Harry pulls his gun on Noel. Unfortunately, he drops his guard down with another emphysema attack, leading to Sid taking control of the situation as he disarms Harry and beats him up. In the meantime, Detective Frampton gets her police radio and tries to call for backup. However, Noel interrupts her and begins to kick and beat the already injured officer. Sid also brings semi-conscious Harry upstairs and throws him on the floor. Following this, Sid plans to murder both officers and Harry in the pub and begins to suffocate the wounded Hickok to death. Meanwhile, Noel begins to strangle Frampton himself. Despite his weakened state, Harry manages to pull a backup revolver from his ankle and shoot Noel in the neck, instantly killing him. In retaliation, Sid pulls his gun on Harry, who asks to be taken out of his misery. Fortunately, the police arrive at the scene after receiving Frampton's earlier interrupted call for backup. Inside the pub, Sid realizes that he has snipers aimed at him, but as he raises his gun to execute Harry, he's shot dead by the police. Now, at a press conference held after the riot, Superintendent Child states that the riot has been put to an end. He then announces that Frampton and the late Hickok will be rewarded for their work, but denies the rumors of vigilante involvement in the entire case. Furthermore, he stresses that there is no evidence as such. Lastly, we see Harry, seemingly recovered from his injury, and happily walking toward the underpass, which is now free of drugs and crime, and is safe to walk through.